Welcome to this episode of They Learn, You Win. I'm your host, David Wentworth from Skooks. And in this episode, I'll be talking about the LXP and the LMS and the overall learning technology marketplace. This is very important to me because I hear all the time about what kind of tools do I need? What kind of technology does my organization need? Do I need an LXP? Do I need an LMS? Do I need both? Do I need some other third thing? And there's just been a lot of noise, a lot of information out there about what's what and what isn't. And so I wanted to take this episode to sort of unclutter that conversation a little bit, dig into what the reality is. And I found the perfect guest to do that with me. I'm joined by Fiona Leteney from Fosway Group, which is Europe's #1 HR industry analyst firm. She's the senior analyst there for learning systems, and she's been in the learning technology space for over 20 years, been with Fosway Group for since 2016, talking to organizations about how to decide what kinds of technologies they need, what they should look at. So she's the perfect person to sort of dig into this and kind of clear the air around what LXP is and isn't, how they work with an LMS, and what companies should be thinking about in the bigger picture around learning technology. So let's get into that conversation. Well, Fiona, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast with me. I know it's great to do this as we have these kind of conversations a lot. We run into each other around the world at different events. And so I was very excited that we had the opportunity to sort of dig into something where we have a little more time and a little less noise to talk about some of these things.
Yeah.
Because,
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking me.
Of course. Yeah. And so the reason why we are talking is, you and I both, we just hear so much, especially over the last few years, just, this is why we do what we do, is there's so much discussion and noise about learning technologies, where it's going, what's real, what isn't. And one of the biggest sort of shakeups outside of the pandemic, let's set that aside for the moment, was when companies started really focusing on this idea of all of a sudden there was this LXP, right? A learning experience platform versus what traditionally had been looked at LMS. And that was very simple, right? It was this one single line item on a learning technology budget. And it was very easy to wrap your head around. And then soon that ballooned very far out. Now there's this new thing. And, you try to watch that shake out over a couple of years. And I still feel like people are very confused, if not sort of just trying to understand what happened. Did something really happen? Did I miss it? And many went down that road. And I know that, focusing so much on learning systems as you do, you've got a unique insight into, what's real, what has any traction. And so I think that's what we want to start off with is I still don't think it's been fully defined for everybody what in certain terms, an LXP is versus say like an LMS. And I know that we're going to go probably a little deeper than that, but I think we should probably start there.
Yes. So we could go back quite a way for this, because from our perspective at Fosway, we kind of saw this coming around about, 2017. I can't remember when the LXP label actually appeared. But we were talking about LMSs and then next-gen learning environments. And that was the way that we started to talk on our analysis and when we were benchmarking various learning systems vendors. So we changed from LMS to learning systems in terms of its total. And then on our benchmark tool, which is a 9-grid, we put circles and squares, and the circles were LMS learning systems. And then we had these next-gen learning environments, which were the ones that were coming in left field to try and fill the gaps of what the LMSs were or weren't doing. And I think there was a kind of a need for that moving on, because LMSs have got bad rap about, the look and feel and that kind of thing. And so everybody was complaining about how clunky they were and that kind of thing. So these new vendors came in, and then we then started to kind of see the label LMS. And what I'll say is that we as a company don't recognize it as a product as such because of this definition problem. we see it as a kind of a label. Now, the label's being used. So the buyers are coming to us, because this is one of the things we do, is help buyers shortlist a number of learning systems. And they'll say, we want to buy an LXP. And our first question is, so what do you mean by an LXP? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And so that takes us back to what we did a few years ago, which was to deconstruct what the experience piece looked like. So we did a huge amount of research. We were talking to both vendors. We were talking to the corporates and saying, so what do you mean by experience? A lot of people think about it as being that look and feel piece, the UX UI piece and that side of it. But we also had a number of different things that we were looking at. And it could be to do with the mobile learning. It could be to do with collaborative. It could be the programmatic side. It could be intelligence. It could be skills. There were I think 7 or 8 different sections that we found cropped up. So whenever we go back to a corporate, we said, we ask them what they are looking for, what problem they want to solve, before we can decide which systems are actually going to fill those gaps. And so we also changed the way we presented it on the grid, and we started to talk about, instead of LMS and next gen learning environments, we started to talk about suites and specialists. So what we meant by suites was that was the end-to-end solution, if you like, that could do all those traditional things that everybody still has to do, the compliance, the mandatory piece. And then the specialists were those that went in and did one thing that they were focused on and did it so much better and would potentially be added into an ecosystem. So you can see this. I mean, I don't know whether any of that resonates with you, but I mean, I could keep going. I could spend hours talking about this. This is what we've been doing for the last, I don't know how many years.
Yeah. We want to spend some time trying to pull it apart, because I think that's really what companies need is some clarity here. And I think what's at play to me, what I felt as this was all going on, is a lot of the challenges that face L&D teams are very difficult. It's just they are, and it's hard in the day-to-day to sort of figure out how to fix these big things, because they're trying to do the day-to-day things. And so if a vendor, somebody comes to say, I've got the thing that fixes your thing, right? So it's like when you talk about learning experience, well, technically everything's a learning experience, right? Anything, even your time in an LMS, that's your learning experience. But companies are struggling with the things like you mentioned, sort of how do we get people engaged? How do we connect to skills? How do we do these things? And so an LXP comes in, oh, you just need an LXP. And the human brain, unfortunately, is always very easy to push towards the simplest answer, right? So this idea of, oh, I just need this thing now. And that's what sort of turned it into a product for a little while, whereas there's this product. And it turns out you're not actually addressing those bigger issues. You still have to address them regardless of what tools you're going to use. And so it's just very easy to fall into this, well, it's because the LMS is old and clunky. We just need this new thing, and that's going to fix everything. And that's just not the case. There's a lot of hard work that has to get done to really figure out what is the ideal learning experience. And it doesn't mean that it needs a unique singular tool to do it. I think when you talk about suites, I'm always interested in that too, because, I mentioned earlier about this idea that it's very nice to have a singular technology line item in a budget that you have to worry about every year, as opposed to this constantly fluxing arrangement of different software. And so you and I have both seen this in our careers, is that the pendulum of suites, right? So this idea of I want a one-stop shop that does everything from core HR to learning to performance, all of it. Just one vendor. I only want to deal with one vendor. And that starts to be the thing. And then the zeitgeist changes a bit, and it's like, well, no, because technology is advanced where these 5 tools are each the best at what they do, and it's very easy to connect them. And so I'll just do it that way. I don't need to have, singular. And I almost feel like we're getting back to this suite mentality. And I'm not sure what's your impression. I mean, I know you mentioned that this idea of suites, but do you think that's where we're headed again?
Absolutely, because this is what we saw is that quite a number of the systems were sold into organizations. These LXPs or these specialists were sold in there because of that thing that the gap they wanted to solve. But when they actually implemented it, they realized that it didn't do some of those things that they needed. And so they were going back to the vendor and say, yeah, but we just assumed you would be able to do this compliance piece. And they said, no. And so what we saw was quite a number of those specialists backfilling with the learning management functionality that we've grown to love and hate over the last 20 years.
While at the same time,
and so
a lot of the LMS providers bled over into the LXP. So now,
exactly. So if you looked at our 9 grids over the last few years, you would see some of the specialists that were squares becoming suites, circles. And that's particularly valid for the mid-market area. So as I said, it's 9 grids, so 333, the mid section, we tend to talk about that's where the mid-market buyer should be looking. And it's crowded if you look at the grid. But the thing is that mid-market buyer can only really afford or justify one system. So it's not a case that they'll have a suite and then add in an LXP. That is the domain of the really large enterprise, really sophisticated, where they're wanting to pull an ecosystem together. But you mentioned there as well that HCM piece, and what I think, there has been a tension there between that HCM learning module and the best of breed. And if the L&D departments get the choice, then they will tend to want to go for the best of breed learning system. Whereas if it's coming from the IT departments, then quite often they'll say, right, we've got this for HR, we want, and it has got a learning system. Show me it can't do it. We want to go just down that one plate. And I think because those HCM players are investing a little bit more in the learning systems, then that's going to get more and more difficult for some organizations, I think. And we're seeing those that have chosen to go down the HCM route having to add some specialists in just to make up the gaps that the HCMs can't do. But also we're seeing some that are being pulled away from the best of breed into that HCM area. So there's a flux at the moment. That tension is not going away by any stretch.
And what you've hit on, to me, there is a key point for L&D professionals, because I've run into it many times as well, and we don't have to name any particular products or environments, but you can tell the difference between when the learning leaders have made a choice or have had influence on the decision of which technologies, and the companies where they do not. And they typically end up with technologies they don't care for, they didn't choose or forced on them for financial reasons. And it gets back to what you started to talk about at the beginning. Whenever you start to think about, do I need an LMS? Do I need an LXP? Do I need some third thing? Do I need both? What is it that I need? It's about, well, what are you trying to do? And the discussions I have with learning leaders who are stuck with systems or tools that they didn't want is, how do I come to the business, that IT director, that finance person, whoever's making these decisions, and explain and justify why this other tool is so valid? Because these are the things I'm trying to do, right? It isn't just, well, learners need a better experience. I mean, that might be true, but that's not an answer, right? It's I need to be able to do these things, which help people do these things, which helps the business do these things, and have that conversation. And the more you start to think about that end result of what is it that I'm trying to do, it starts to answer almost all of the questions, right? It answers what
Mm-hmm.
systems do I need? Do I need these ancillary tools because I need people to do these things? Do I need this tool? Can I justify looking outside of the already in-house suite? What is it that I'm trying to do, right? So you constantly have to be looking at things from that perspective rather than, hey, look at this tool and all the things it does. Let's go get that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's sometimes a solution in search of a problem. Whereas, this idea of what is it that I'm trying to do, and it helps define that suite environment. Do I need all of the things that this one provider has? Can I move this way or that way? I want to stick a little bit with the specifics around LXP and LMS because I think we can finally put this thing to bed, as a discussion point, because it's just been coming up a lot longer than I thought. Educate me a little, because sometimes I think, and I might be wrong about this, was there a time when it was really about the types of learning interactions you could have? So organizations wanted people to have broader, more different, more experiential learning interactions. And the idea was that an LMS couldn't manage or track those as well as, say, an LXP. You start to get into things like Tin Can or XAPI, which, the ability, this standard that allows you to track things that are not just course completions and grades. Did that play into this, or am I sort of conflating two issues?
So it's a really good question. I'm not sure whether initially it was the interactions, but actually we kind of looked at it from are we talking about learner experience or learning experience, and the difference between those? And quite often it was just the learner experience that was kind of at the forefront of the buyer's mind, if you like, and that look and feel and the clunkiness and of the old systems. But I think that engagement piece and the ability to, whether it was the collaboration, whether it was being able to rate, it was the additional things that might have had in some learning systems the ability to have that tracked as well, because that as well brings it into whether a piece is recommended. So I think, I don't know whether it's related. I mean, might be a question back to you, but the culture of the push of learning and that mandatory training, there was a desire from learning and development to be much more of a pull so that the individual could go looking. And I think that was the difference between what people perceived the LMS or the LXP could do. So the LMS was kind of just pushing out learning. It was the mandatory, it was the compliance stuff, and somebody was assigned it and they did it, and they only went to the learning system if they had been assigned some training. Whereas L&D were wanting to kind of open that up and make it so that it became much more of a learning culture in an organization. And they were able to have an area there that people could go and look and decide for themselves what sort of learning they wanted to do based on, whether it was appropriate to their role or whether it was appropriate to their next role and that kind of thing. So I think those were for me, those were the kind of things that were the differentiators. But as you said, that a lot of those that were LMSs added that layer on anyway.
Right.
So it's not a separate system
Yeah,
anymore.
I was just going to say,
I really do think.
Do you think that there's really any LMS worth its value out there that doesn't do that to some degree, unless it's a purely, compliance-driven system, which there are those. But I feel like we've gotten to a point where that simple push only doesn't really exist, right? I mean, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that's, we're coming back to they might call it something different. People might be looking, for what they call a learning experience platform. It's almost not cool to be asking for an LMS
Yep.
these days. It's that kind of thing. It's but it, from our perspective, we look at it as a learning system, and it's very much based on what are your requirements. We've got 49 on the grid at this last year, so 2023. There are 49 vendors on the list, and there are lots in the wings that would either like to be on the list or on the grid, or have been and have come off because they're just outside the criteria. But it's every single one of those is a unique product. The staff are passionate about what they can deliver. Some of them do marketing better than others. Some of and therefore get out there and known. But there's usually a focus. There's usually something that kind of swings it, and so that's quite often why we're asked, because we've got the data there. Just give us a shortlist. What should we be looking at? Because there's so much out there. It's huge. The corporates that go it alone, take my hat off to them, because there's a lot there, to go at, huge amounts. Yeah, absolutely. We focus on Europe. All right. So you guys in the States have got even more there that we only look at if they decide to cross the Atlantic. So there's a lot to go at, but all of them have something that's unique about them. I think kind of at the moment, obviously we couldn't go through a whole podcast without talking about AI.
Almost made it.
But sorry, David, had to bring it up. But there are certain things that become, it's almost like they're leapfrogging each other. Yeah. It will become a commodity, but it's who gets there sooner, who's innovating, who's showing that they're innovating, whose messaging has it there that they're doing this stuff. Even though AI has been around for more than 20 years, in one form or another. But yeah, generative AI has changed things considerably.
And that's the challenge is what's real, what isn't, and when marketing drives what happens in the market, it's always challenging. Coming back to the idea of the LXP, it seems so simple when you say learning systems, and it's like, well, yeah, because that's what they all are. Why we should have started that a long time ago, and that should be the terminology we use. But in the market, when you're trying to sell these things, you have to say LMS because it triggers that thought process for folks. Okay, I have to tick these boxes that I need these things. But let's be fair. Those organizations that decided to call themselves an LXP, they hit a very unique moment in time where they were able to separate themselves because, let's face it, the word management, it's not a great word. Like any process that gets managed, it just sounds like, oh, that's not like imagine if your friends called up and they were your weekend manager. Your weekend doesn't sound like it's going to be very much fun. So you get to say, oh, no, it's a learning experience. And suddenly, all these opportunities and possibilities open in your mind, which those possibilities were kind of already always there. Yep. And we could always go in that direction. And I think maybe, hopefully in short time, it will all settle down to, look, we're talking about learning systems. And so you can get this big bucket and just say, look, we're trying to help people grow and develop and learn things. Yep. Use these tools to do it. Yep. Now, these tools vary widely in what you're doing. But again, it comes back to, what is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Because I think that's what happened in the LXP LMS space, is that marketing, a hype, and the way the market works, it's fast. The providers, you got to get out in front, got to make some noise. It just got so out ahead of the discussion around what are we trying to do? And so everybody kind of latched onto this next new thing. But I think, at this point in my mind, most, if not all, LMSs that you could possibly name would almost fall into that next gen to some degree, right? They've all kind of been pulled by this vacuum of space towards this thing. So we can't even say that really anymore, because it's sort of short selling what's really going on is this constant evolution of the technology. I think, to me, do you think we'll get to a point where, like, next year, even 2024, somebody doesn't come into the space going, I want to buy an LXP, like they're going to do a specific shopping search for an LXP? Or do you think that's still going to be a A named market segment.
Well, that's what we're seeing at the moment, and I think from a buyer's perspective, there's a long tail for that label, if you like.
Yeah.
But I think in any, whatever the label is, as I think we're both saying, you've got to figure out what the requirements are. Some of those requirements are not actually features. It's not functionality. Oh, yeah. It's about a partnership with a vendor, an organization. And I think one of the things that frustrates, I think, certainly some of the vendors as well, about our 9 grid is that they want to be seen as a strategic leader above that top line. And we are not moving them above the top line. And it's not about the amount of functionality they have. It's about their capability to service or support the large, complex, sophisticated, global organization that needs all those configurations for the different parts of the world for particular legal requirements or whatever. There's certain things that, only certain vendors can actually deliver. And so if, that's, and you actually mentioned the word vacuum. We've been using that in some research that we're doing about those larger enterprises we're doing at the moment. And because at the top right of the grid, there is one vendor in there, one suite. There are a couple of specialists, but there's one suite that is considered the strategic leader. And it keeps acquiring others that get around it. So there is, so there is that vacuum. So where are the people, where's the competition going to come from? Because I think some of the buyers are feeling, or the corporates are feeling a little bit, we've not got a great deal of choice now. And for certain sizes, complexities, sophisticated organizations. So where's it going to come from? And to the left of that zone, we have a zone that's got all the HCM. Yep. So we've already talked about the tension between HCM vendors, but there is that mid-market as well. What do they need to do to step up to deliver to those? So coming back to what we're talking about, it's about it's how, where the buyer is. Are they global? Are they local? Are they wanting a local player? Are they wanting something that is actually quite simple, or is it focused on their experience is great because they do a great mobile app for hospitality and retail? Is it extended enterprise? Is it what's the there's an analyst and vendor term that might need explaining, but
actually.
Yeah. It's,
to dig into a little inside baseball, you've mentioned you've been referring to the grid. I just, for folks who aren't familiar with what you're describing, it's and I'll let you define it. But to me, I like the whole idea of this, and what Fiona's talking about is this grid that they use to plot different providers in the spaces based on a series of criteria. I like it because for years everyone always would come to me and say, "What are the top 5 LMSs? What are the top 10?" It's like there is, you can't list them. Like there isn't one. It's based on all these different things. What do you need? And I think the grid gets at this. So give a, if you can, like a synopsis of what this grid, because you're talking about different plot areas for folks.
Okay. Yeah, and it's not like some maybe quadrants that I can mention that everybody's wanting to get into the top right quadrant. We basically say that every single zone has value, and it depends where the buyer is. As I said earlier, there are lots of really good vendors, and they are passionate about delivering what they deliver. So what we do on the vertical axis, then, and it's in 3s. It's not an analog scale, so it's low, mid, high across all the dimensions that we do. And that vertical axis it's called potential, but it's a combination of the functionality and where the buyer is. So as I mentioned before, so that low potential, it's the sort of simpler functionality. It's probably where as I said, the the retail and the hospitality buyers are. We saw quite an increase there during and post-COVID from that perspective. That mid section is the mid-market. It's, everybody wants an LMS, or a learning system, that's where it is. The top end is the sophisticated, it's the really large global organizations. So that's the vertical axis. The horizontal axis is about performance. And so performance can be, so how often are they shortlisted? How often do they win accounts? And it also takes in what the customer thinks of them. So we don't just talk to the vendors, we talk to the customers. And so we get a feel for how they're stepping up in that particular, once they've bought, are they supporting them well enough? And sometimes what we find, what I'll say is within the zone, within each of the boxes, within each zone, then there is a trajectory, a direction of travel that we put our stamp as analysts on there. So if somebody's in a top right of the box within a zone, it means that they're accelerating both from a roadmap perspective and also from a sales and performance perspective. So that's the kind of, what we're adding. There's also colours on there in terms of total cost of ownership. There is also the size of the icons themselves to indicate the presence, bearing in mind it's about Europe. So there are folks on there that are perhaps lower down the grid in one of the other directions, because they might be massive in the US, but actually in Europe they haven't made it across, either they haven't got feet on the ground or whatever. So
but it highlights the complexity of the space, and you start to get into shootouts or top lists or even RFPs, which I know it's a process that's sometimes a necessary evil, but it doesn't tell you the story. It's just a tick of boxes that most providers are going to tick. I always say it really gets into, when you're trying to make these decisions, get in there and meet, it helps to shortlist, right? You mentioned shortlisting, and I think that's such a critical piece because it's crazy. There's 600-700 different providers that could fall into this category in the US. Being able to shortlist, yes. So, when you get there, but then this idea of, okay, give me a demo, but don't just walk in the door and show me your demo, right? Here's what I want the system to do for me. I want to walk you through the day in life of one of my learners, not show me your best and brightest bells and whistles, because that, again, it's not going to solve any of your problems.
You can get wild.
No, it's so complex, and I do love that you guys do that. You take that very deep analytical perspective, that there's so many things at play from the vendor side and the buy side that have to come together to figure out what's right for me. And it isn't just whatever the latest name of something is, like an LXP. And I'm telling you, I don't mean to get down. I just think I love some of the providers that do that. I just don't think they need that name. And I think we'll get to a place where everyone's just doing what they do really well, and people are going to be able to do a better job of figuring it out, I hope. Learning systems. But, that's my little tiny prediction, which brings me to, I want to do a prediction segment with you, and I'm going to do this with all my guests, and you have a choice of 3 options for predictions. Okay. We can go look at a previous prediction that should have come true this year, right? So somebody last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, made a prediction for 2023. We can look at that and see how that turned out. We can look at predictions that are currently being made for, say, 2024 or even 2025, and see what we think about those predictions. Or you can choose to make your own prediction about any time in the near or far future. So what is your choice?
So I'm going to use one of our predictions.
Yes. I was hoping so.
This is
as an industry analyst. I think you would be the person to do your own prediction.
We ought to be,
Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah, and we do this. So I mean, we've talked about the 9 grids, but the 9 grid report, which is downloadable free from our website, has market trends and solution trends. So there are written sort of trends there, and it's what we are seeing and what we're expecting in the future. So there's quite a lot to go and have a look at, and you can see whether or not because the report was published at the beginning of February this year, so you can see whether or not we've been true or not. What sometimes happens, and this prediction that I'm going to mention, is that we came across this, and it's been mentioned on numerous occasions in the reports, because we have not seen it come to fruition yet. But I'm just so passionate about this. So I know we've not got another hour to kind of talk about it. So this is, I mean, we say that the digital experience, the headline is the digital experience for the cohort-based programs is not good at the moment. That's the gist of it. We recognised, and it was before COVID, we had one of our biggest clients come to us and say, we want something that will do programmatic learning. And we said, so what do you mean by programmatic learning? And they said, well, it's the longer programs. So I know there's lots of hype about bite size and everything going short, and you can't have anything longer than 2 minutes. But if you're talking about a leadership program, or you're talking about onboarding or whatever, you're going to have to be doing it longer than just the bite size. It's also the sort of thing where you, because again, there's a lot of talk about in the flow of work. So everything's got to be integrated with Teams, Slack, or whatever, be in that flow. Programs are the things that you kind of need to come away from the flow of work to do. And so this client, as I say, quite a number of years ago, we said, so you've already got an ecosystem of systems to die for. What's wrong? Why isn't it not doing what you want it to do? And so, as you know, I said, show me. And so we had a look, and we could see that what they were aiming at was the top leaders in the organization. And to be honest, they were embarrassed about the state of how to get to that particular program, and just asking those top leaders to do this, then that. It could be read this, have a discussion about that. And it just hadn't got that same vibe as they would get if they were at a hotel in the Far East, or, somewhere, where they were coming together from all over the world. So we thought that COVID, the pandemic, might influence this, and it did in a way. Obviously, you couldn't do those classroom-based training, that you couldn't go to the hotels anymore, so they had to be done online. But quite a lot of people, all they did was they went online with a PowerPoint and a virtual classroom, and that's not good enough, really. That digital experience is not up to what people were doing kind of in the classroom. So I believe that there is a need for the vendors to step up and deliver, because I'm also hearing from some of the larger corporates, we need something that does programmatic learning better than what we've got at the moment, because our organization is wanting to observe the sustainability piece. They're wanting to, carbon footprint, reduce it. Some are even saying if you go over a certain budgeted amount of carbon footprint, then you can have your bonuses reduced. So that focuses the mind a tad. And therefore, there needs to be a digital solution that provides so much more than what they're doing at the moment. There is a small number of specialists that are doing it. But even those specialists are struggling at the moment, I believe, because the corporates haven't actually bought into it yet either. And I think that some of them are going back, post-pandemic, going back to classroom and going back into that sort of that environment where you've got the ability to communicate with a cohort, with a group of people, just them, them because you can see them. They've got a facilitator or a tutor there. They can be given assignments to do. They can go off and do those assignments. So I feel that type of environment is not there yet in the learning systems. well enough to satisfy it. That we've got the journeys, we've got that kind of thing, and we've got collaborative, but it's just not been done in a way that matches what could be done in the classroom. And I'm hopeful. I'm predicting. I don't know how long it'll take. Don't ask me to put a date on it. But there will be the vendors will step up when the corporates start to shout about it and they want something to replace. Then the vendors will have to step up and provide it better than it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was long-winded answer.
Well, there's a lot going on though. But I think you're right.
Yeah.
See, I've always, looked at these things that whenever we focus on one thing, whenever it was talking about things like in the flow of learning, we get so much into it that it becomes at the expense of everything else, or micro learning at the expense of everything else. And, long before COVID, I was never one of these people. I just spent so much time as an industry analyst thinking about learning technology and emerging technologies, but I never was up there saying, well, the classroom is dead and we need to do all these other things. Like, no, the in-person learning is the core of what we do. And unfortunately, it was 90% of what everyone was doing for the longest time. COVID, showed that there's a need and a possibility to do it differently. And I think you're spot on that as this pendulum, we figure out that like, okay, look, we know why in-person learning works. We get it as human beings. And we know what of those elements we can't necessarily replicate from a digital perspective. But there are so many aspects of what we were doing in person that we didn't need to, or could be enhanced with some sort of digital solution that was part of it, right? Not replacement, but part of it. And so I think you're right that there's this opportunity, and as a prediction, hopefully someone's figures it out quickly that here's how you do that, because I think there's a huge need to solve that digital aspect of those larger programs. And again, I'm also not a fan of, we don't know larger programs. No, there has to be some sort of big thing, like the big rock that all the smaller stones are center around. Yeah. So I agree with you. Will someone figure it out? I don't know, because I think they're still struggling with really what is that core good in-person experience, right? Like, are we not wasting people's time when they're together with introductions or going over old material or getting everyone on the same page, which they should have been on the same page when they walked in the door, that kind of thing. But I think there is, a possibility. So I would agree with you that there's a bit of going back to the word, the vacuum there. No, so I agree that that someone's going to figure it out, and they hopefully figure it out soon, because it's been a huge challenge. I mean, I will say that I know that this idea of hybrid learning, like I know hybrid work is going to exist. People are going to work from home and in the office and do both and go back and forth in a myriad different ways. What I hope companies stop trying to figure out is how to get in-person and virtual people learning synchronously. It's too much effort for too little return. Agreed?
Yeah. Totally.
I have.
Yeah. It's so hard to include everybody into that. Yeah.
I have two children who were in middle school and high school at the time, and watching them try to attend a virtual class that some kids were physically in. The technology wasn't there. God bless them. The teachers were not prepared for this at all. And it was pretty much an unmitigated disaster. So hopefully organizations realize, look, there's a better way. We don't have to do that. There's things to do. We can do that around it. So I appreciate that prediction very much around, figuring out that digital chunk of the big learning picture. I think there's a great opportunity to do that.
Actually, just something to add to that, because it's interesting you brought education into it. Just the specialists that are doing it well are actually come out of education. So it's those that have been doing programs for ever, and they have crossed over into the corporate world. So we've got a lot to learn from. I know it's hybrid's a separate thing, but those that are doing the online cohort-based learning in maybe higher ed or whatever have got something to talk to us about in the corporate world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I feel like for me, you've helped solidify some of my thoughts, give me some clarity around sort of this ongoing LMS LXP conversation, which I think will
Mhm.
start to dwindle down into the bigger discussion that we're
Yeah,
having
yeah,
about what am I trying to do, so we don't have to have this
yeah, yeah.
conversation again next year. So I really appreciate your insights on that. For those of you who have been listening, if you would, please subscribe to the podcast so you can get all your episodes wherever you get podcasts. But Fiona, thank you again so much for spending time with me, and hopefully, when people hear this, as the title of the podcast, right? When they learn, you win. So these are all just more tools to help you try to win. So again, Fiona, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, real pleasure. Thanks, David, for asking me. Thank you.